All right, and it is officially 6:05. Thank you all for being here. My name is Allison Weber. I am the Forest and Water Campaign Manager for Friends of the Inyo, and I am very lucky tonight to be a facilitator of this wonderful presentation with Kyle Rowrink, who I will let introduce himself, and Patrick Donnelly.
Thank you, Allison. Kyle Rowrink, Executive Director of the Great Basin Water Network. This idea was born out of the Water Justice Summit that Allison and I have partnered on with the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission and a number of other great people and CBD and Patrick and many others over the past couple of years. And this was just one of the things that we heard a number of people saying, like, yeah, we're confused about Nepa. We want to learn more. Let's get something in the works. And so this is a great moment for us, and it speaks to what happens when folks get together and collaborate. So I'm really honored that you all are here. And then I'll pass it over to Patrick.
Hey everybody, I am sort of getting over laryngitis, so voice is kind of croaking a little bit, and I'm not going to be able to give my presentation tonight, so Kyle's on the hook for the whole thing. But I at least made slides for him. But anyway, I just want to say hi, I'm Patrick Donnelly. I'm Great Basin Director at the Center for Biological Diversity. You know, I feel like this is an extremely important forum this evening. You know, we engage with Nepa, the National Environmental Policy Act, every day. And it is really one of our main avenues for intervening on projects and trying to defend the environment. But, you know, it's all well and good when Allison and Kyle and I work on NEPA. But what really makes a difference is when people work in NEPA and people engage in NEPA, not just paid environmentalists. NEPA is not only a legal forum, but it is an opportunity for the public to engage, for the public to share their opinions, for the public to be heard. And ultimately, you know, lawsuits can help slow down the bad guys, but it is the tide of public opinion that stops bad things from happening, that stops bad projects. You know, it is pressure from the public that ultimately changes the tide of development on public lands. And so, you know, ultimately, citizens or participants such as yourselves, you know, to get involved with NEPA, that can really make all the difference, much more in many cases than just a lawsuit from an environmental group. And so I'm really glad that Allison and Kyle put this together. Happy for the center to be able to participate. And I thank you all for attending, because ultimately, you know, your participation really does make the difference when we're trying to defend water and public lands. Thanks.
Really well said, Patrick. Absolutely. Putting education in all of y'all's hands is exactly what we're trying to do here, and what we hope to continue with the Great Basin Water Justice Summit, adding these collaborations between organizations, activists, tribal leaders, and hopefully making some good out of it, like a NEPA 101 workshop. So as a matter of housekeeping, we'll be recording this to add to our general Great Basin Water Justice Summit and collaborations thereafter materials. And so after we send you this presentation, we'll also hopefully be sending the recording not too long after, so that you can continue to access that later or share it into the future. And it'll be uploaded to our YouTube channel as well. And yeah, all of that information to come in a housekeeping email later, so don't worry about it now. And I think without further ado, Kyle, we want to just hop in.
Absolutely. And I think I did just want to say that our friends from the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission had something come up tonight, and they apologize for not being here, but we're really grateful for their partnership and all of this and helping us put it together. But without further ado, what I am going to do really quick is just give the brief summary. We want you all to leave here understanding the who, what, where, when, and why of NEPA. You know what it is and how it looks in practice. And I think what I wanted to do really quickly was to just show you all a NEPA document that I was looking at last week. And I'm not going to go through it. I'm not going to get into the particulars, because that would just be insane and put you all to sleep. But like, I just think it will be a good way for all of us to understand what we're really talking about tonight, at least whenever we get a NEPA document. So, where is my desktop here? Okay. So this right here is for those of you that know me, of course, I was looking at a supplemental environmental impact statement for the near-term Colorado River operations. That really doesn't matter right now, but I think what I wanted to just show you all is when you open up a document like this is an EIS. This is basically one of 3 different types of documents that you would see in any NEPA process. But think about this: the purpose and need chapter, the description of alternatives, affected environment and environmental consequences, and all these considerations: hydrologic resources, water quality, air quality, cultural resources, biological resources, recreation, you name it, you see it. So, and then consultation with other government agencies. And so I don't know if you all can see this, but this document is more than 1,100 pages long. And again, it's why we're not going to go through something like this, but it can feel very overwhelming when you get a document like this. And I think one of the goals tonight is to say, like, hey, we don't have to be overwhelmed by this. We can do some things really well. We know some things about the places that we live, the places we love, the management that we understand. And so I want you all to leave here with just feeling more comfortable when you say, like, hey, I'm taking on this project. So some of the ways to do that are outlined in PowerPoints, and I am going to dig into that right now. Wonderful. Okay. So there we go. The who, what, where, when, and why. And the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969. This statement kind of speaks for itself. And it was a major landmark law at the time, passed by Nixon. And again, we're going to get into the who, what, where, when, and why of it all. And I think the first thing I remember my attorneys with the Water Network like really hammering this into me is like NEPA is procedural. And it really only applies when there is a major federal action. It is not a mandate of specific results, but it is a dictate of processes for management of projects on federal lands. Certain values aren't prioritized over the other. It doesn't exist to support or oppose a project. It exists in theory to ensure a framework for public participation and long-term management that complies with other federal laws. So again, I use that term major action very specifically, and here's what that really means. This was developed by the Council of Environmental Quality, which was they promulgate rules guiding the NEPA process. CEQ was created in the 1969 Act, but you can see the definitions here, what a major federal action is, and therefore when you have one of these 3 scenarios listed on here, that is why a NEPA, as we would say in shorthand, would be triggered. And we're going to get a little bit more granular on that in just a moment. And so, yeah, what is a major federal action? And I think as you can see here, it really runs the gamut of everything from water pipelines to military installations and operations to geothermal projects, grazing, timber, again, any major federal action. And so I think for a lot of us on here, these are some of the things that come to mind when we're saying, hey, there's NEPA on something. It usually looks something like this. And there's also a need for programmatic functions for NEPA, not just individual specific projects, resource management plans, land and resource management plans for BLM or Forest Service, the big Western Solar Plan, major offshore drilling operations, again, the Navy and Air Force authorizations, it's again, you name it, but it isn't always just a specific project. It can be for other management criteria for like how the BLM should function in the Ely district, for example. And we're going to get into some of those. We're going to at least make sure that you all know where some of these things exist because there's kind of a they all work together when you do a NEPA, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So, as I mentioned earlier, NEPA really includes a lot of other federal laws, and Section 102 is really the glue that brings NEPA together with other federal laws. And I just put a little screenshot of that on the presentation so you can all see what the law actually says. And so things like the Federal Lands Policy and Management Act, Endangered Species Act, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, NHPA, and other federal laws are all at play and have to be followed. And usually it's when in a NEPA, how you can be successful and if you are, making comments on a document, or ultimately if you wind up in court, it's usually successful NEPA hinges on some other law. It's not the NEPA itself, again, because NEPA is procedural. So, and as I just mentioned some of those resource management plans and forest management plans, NEPA, just as it requires compliance with other federal laws, it requires compliance with agency planning documents. So for those of us that are constantly looking at an EIS or an EA through the lens of the BLM, we're constantly looking at what we would call RMPs, or the resource management plans, to see what they require for actions on federal lands, and what are some of the sideboards and guidelines in place. So, I would say here, and we'll get into this again in a little bit, if the BLM releases an EIS or an EA and in the region that you really care about or live in, it's always good to understand what the major federal agencies, what types of planning documents are guiding their day-by-day activities. That will help make the understanding of what you are up against a little bit easier. And here are getting into some of the nitty-gritty a little bit more. What agencies must continue. This is also in Section 102 of the law. And this comes up as in some of those environmental effects. I think that was Chapter 3 in that one document that I had up to start this conversation. But what are reasonably foreseeable effects? Potentially adverse effects? What are the alternatives? And what are the relationships between local and short-term uses and the maintenance of long-term productivity of the environment? and irreversible and irretrievable commitment of federal resources. So these are things that are all discussed in maybe some would say great detail in these documents. And a couple of times tonight already, I've mentioned EAs and EISs, and we'll be talking about RODs, the record of decisions, and all types of other fun acronyms that get thrown around. But we have a on the next slide. I think this is a good basic tree to just understand. Like this is actually how it works. This is the process. So if someone says, "Hey, there's a major federal action on federal lands. There's a major action that's being proposed for federal lands." These are the 3 lanes that you could expect to see that proposed action take. And the first one is a categorical exclusion, which really doesn't include any analysis, much detailed analysis. That comes with a lot of agency deference and just saying, hey, like, we really don't need to do this. It's a major action, but not that major. There's a little bit of analysis and some coordination maybe among agencies or tribes or some other entity, but there's not a whole lot going on. There's no significant impact. And when you get into this zone of significant impact, this is where you'll either choose between an environmental assessment, an EA, or an EIS. And so you can all see here the courses of action that if there's an uncertainty about what a significant impact may be, then you're going to go the EA route. It's less rigorous. It moves at a quicker pace. And usually comes to an agency decision faster, and usually the agency is likely to be supportive if it's on the EA route. Just as kind of a categorical exclusion is fast tracking something, the EA is doing that for something that's a little bit bigger. And I think for all environmental groups, public interest minded folks, the EIS is where the rubber really meets the road. In NEPA, it's where we get the hardier analysis. It's where the controversy really exists for projects on federal lands, and those begin with scoping, and groups like mine and Allison's and Patrick's, like and concerned citizens. That's when you start. That's when you start really engaging in the NEPA proper. And these notices pop up in the Federal Register, or they will be sent out by, for example, the BLM or the Forest Service to folks who are on their email lists. And that really kicks off the process. And we're going to get into some of those particulars in a little bit for what that can look like. And ultimately, again, it ends with an agency decision, and that can lead to other things like litigation or appeals within even deeper levels of the bureaucracy. So it's funny, so much of the time of environmentalists can be eaten up by an EIS. But when you look at the statistics, and you hear a lot of criticisms that like NEPA is just so burdensome, and these environmental impact statements are just grueling and sucking up time and energy, and NEPA needs reforms because EISs are out of control. But the statistics don't lie. Like the preponderance of cases are CXs. They're categorical exclusions. These are things where agency deference just takes over, and there's really not a lot of meaningful opportunity for the public in that regard. So I think a lot of those claims about how NEPA is just out of control and in need of reform, I think these statistics demonstrate that those calls are really futile and hyperbolic and really exist to serve interests that don't want any scrutiny about, their wanting to use our collective and public resources.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people chiming in today were asking questions about categorical exclusions. So we know your struggle, and we know that that's definitely the big one out there on a lot of people's troubled minds.
Well, yeah, we can, this is also the important part of getting together is we can collectively commiserate. Um, and I think, you know, when you are in the situation of wanting to comment on an EA, on an EIS, or even a categorical exclusion, this is something that Patrick's presentation will dig into a little bit more. But yeah, we're here to kind of collectively think and talk about how do we be as effective as possible. And I know this gets Byzantine and wonkish, but we want to be able to cite laws that we know could be flouted by a certain project, cite regs that could be flouted, and other processes that could be flouted or in jeopardy, or just something where we want to let regulators, because regulators have to review all comments that are submitted, and for an example, in an EIS, that a draft comes out, and then a final one comes out, and there will be opportunities to comment on that. And Patrick's presentation gets into that a little bit more. But when we're making these comments, it's really important to be as specific as possible. But don't think that just because you don't know a law, that your understanding of place or your understanding of management, your understanding of anything that could be applicable, don't think that that doesn't matter either. And it's always important to, what we say is, just load the record with anything that you know to be credible. And it is something that has to be considered. It's as Patrick says, it's the kitchen sink. On an EIS, an EA, and even a categorical exclusion, you'll often hear about NEPA requiring a hard look. And the agency in charge of overseeing an EIS or an EA or a CX, that hard look really means that they cannot be making arbitrary and capricious decisions, abusing their discretion. And I think when bad decisions are ultimately made in NEPA, what public interest groups or anyone else who feels aggrieved, what we're ultimately saying is that the agency abused its discretion to allow something to occur. And more, we're seeing this in relation to climate change. And what is an agency's discretion in ensuring that our public trust resources aren't being put in jeopardy by a project, and in light of everything that we know to be true about climate change and everything that is likely to be coming down the pike because of climate change. And this is where things can sometimes get a little disappointing. And in, within the past year, we've seen some upsetting decisions in light of climate change. But again, the agency has a really, really strong, they have strong legs to stand on as it relates to deference. And there is some new guidance on greenhouse gas emissions, but I put this slide in here because I don't think we want it. Don't think that it's some type of silver bullet. And there is some more consideration that an agency has to give, but again, it's not a silver bullet just because a project is emitting GHGs, and it's you know, we're slowly moving forward, but unfortunately, it might not be fast enough. So these, I wanted to put these links up here, and we wanted to make sure that you would get them all, because there are some great ways to track, you know, like how do I keep up to date with any project that is being proposed near me, or a place I love, or a place somebody I love really cares about. And it's these are some of the places that I go, and some of the things that I subscribe to, and Patrick subscribes to, and Allison, and so many others, just to make sure that they're keeping track of all these things. And so this, I do want to call out this EPA site of all ongoing EISs is a really wonderful resource if you're concerned about something. But you know, if you're just catching something in the middle of an EIS, you know, you might be catching it at the, you know, when it's too late. There might be 1 day for public comment left. So, you know, one of the most dutiful ways to do it is to sign up for the Federal Register and religiously check every day of what the BLM is putting out for EISs. But in most cases, you're not going to see an EA coming out on the Federal Register. You're not going to see categorical exclusions coming out on the Federal Register. So then that's where you go to e-planning, and you can see the projects that are underway, and we will come back to that just in 1 second. I wanted to go to the next slide. I do want to show you all the e-planning site and how that works, or Allison may be doing that. But the forest management plans and resource management plans, we provided a link to many of them right here. The Inyo National Forest Plan, Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest Plan, the Uinta-Wasatch Cache Forest Plan, and then every RMP for BLM in Nevada and Utah and California is all right here. So that is, those will all be available to you. Allison, do you want to go through through any of this, or the e-planning?
Yeah, I can go ahead and take us on our little tour here.
Great.
Let me hop in here. All right, so let's get these links going. So our first one here, which is our e-planning. If you have something like a categorical exclusion, environmental assessment that's not going to be on the Federal Register, and you know that it's on Bureau of Land Management lands, or BLM lands, this is going to be your place to go. You can search by your state, your office. So for example, I know that here in the Eastern Sierra, we have the Bishop Field office. So I can click here, and without knowing, you know, anything, if it's a categorical exclusion, in an RMP, environmental impact statement, any of that information, I can just search, and I can see what's going on right now here on the e-planning. So for example, we've got this Control Silver Peak subtransmission line that Friends of the Inyo pretty recently submitted comments on. You can see that the comment period is closed. You can look at the maps. You can get the relevant people to bother over there on the side if you have questions that are not answered on the side here. And get all of your information, hopefully as clearly laid out as a federal government website can give you. Here in your e-planning. So your documents and maps, all of that should be here, as well as your continuous project identification. So if you want to search for a specific thing and you know your number, you can always put that into the search bar as well. And then Kyle, maybe you can hop in here, but do you know where on the BLM page is the subscribing to a specific thing? I know where it is on the Forest Service, but not here.
Oh, let's go.
You can't subscribe
That's
to
what I thought.
projects.
I was like, maybe they know a secret. I don't.
No, no, BLM's e-planning is not designed for user access and ease.
And that's why if there are things that you truly are concerned with, like signing up for the Federal Register, signing up for your local BLM office's emails.
Yeah.
And it's like it's a pain in the butt, and you might get some emails that you don't want, but these are ways to just cover your butts. And I think for those of you that don't do this every day, know that Patrick, Allison, and I, we're looking at this stuff as much as we possibly can. But it is nice to know that other members of the public are looking too, and we're all living lives. And I think there's just like, I live with a constant fear of something slipping through the cracks someday, but being vigilant, once you get the hang of it, it doesn't take that much time, and it gives you a little comfort in light of everything that is happening in the world.
Yeah, and on the screen here, we also have the Forest Service version of their e-planning, which is the Schedule of Proposed Actions, or SOPA, which looks a little more old-fashioned, but is actually a little more intuitive. And you can actually subscribe to things. So again, we'll go to this tiny little drop-down bar here, hit California. You can either click here on the map. So I'm going to go over or just scroll down here. This will have not only your national forests, but things like scenic areas, recreation areas, anything under the Forest Service umbrella of management. So it's your place to go. I'll go to the Humboldt-Toyabe and click on my current SOPA report. It'll come out in a kind of ugly, just little spreadsheet looking guy. You do have a little bit of a table of contents for your ranger districts, but you can also, if you want to kind of be nosy in what's going on everywhere in the Humboldt-Toyabe, you can just scroll and maybe get your morning coffee if you're really interested. And you can see there's all sorts of things that either have a new listing or updated. So that's going to be if they have new information, like there's a new date on when something's going to come out, or when the next step in the NEPA process will begin, such as scoping, comment periods, and things like that. You can click on your project's link just anywhere in the SOPA. They all have them. And from here, you can subscribe to email updates, or if you're fancy and have a site summary thing in your browser, you can also subscribe to it up here. So subscribe to email updates, hit your email, and you'll get updates in theory, because again, it's the federal government on that specific project. So the Forest Service makes it a little bit easier here. BLM, again, less so. And that is why you need things like the EPA site of all ongoing environmental impact statements, or EISs. Again, it has this kind of search feature where you can go by any keywords, also agencies, states and territories, and things like that. And this should have information going back to the 80s. So if you want an environmental impact statement for either a current project or a past one, this will be your place to go.
I'm gonna hop in for just a sec about the EISEA issue. BLM really wants to do EAs, and so does the Forest Service, because it's much less work for them, lower page limits, less time involved. I've been with the center for 7 years, and I've probably worked on 3 or 4 EISs, and I've probably worked on 30 or 40 EAs. So like the vast majority of stuff you're interested in is going to be an EA. And so it makes it a lot harder to track. It makes it a lot harder to follow. And it really does make, like, the way I find out about EAs is almost always on the press release list from my local BLM office. That's where you hear about EAs, because like scouring e-planning is really tedious, very, very tedious. And so it, really like want to emphasize getting on your local BLM office's press release list, developing relationships at the BLM office so that they know you're interested, and you might just get an email saying, hey, just wanted to let you know about this EA that just came out. Because ultimately, most stuff we're interested in is going to be done through EAs. Not that we don't have EISs, but they are reserved for the most major of federal actions.
Absolutely. Great addition, Patrick. Yeah. Again, going back to those statistics that Kyle ran off for us. I mean, 4% are EAs, 1% are environmental impact statements. That is going to be very little of what we're actually seeing roll through our systems here. And so you definitely have to be vigilant, signing up for press releases. And yeah, I love that adding of building relations, because at the end of the day, so much of this work, whether you're coming in it from an environmental standpoint or from a community mindset, it's all going to be relationship driven. Absolutely. And that's part of why we have the summits, and it's part of why we're here today. And then wrapping up again with the Federal Register. So, this is the Ranger Aid one. Huh? Well, this is that big document that Kyle was talking about. This is going to be, you know, big issues every day of lots and lots of information. And if you have a specific project in mind that you're trying to engage on, might not be where you want to be. But if you are maybe beginning a new group or have several issues you want to keep track of, at the end of the day, slogging through information here on the Federal Register um, is going to be something you might want to do. And so this website here has all sorts of information, not worded that greatly, but how to subscribe for things. You're going to need to make an account with the Federal Register. It's not hard. You just need an email that you want these things to get sent to, some sort of password that either you'll remember or your laptop will remember for you. And then you'll just have to confirm it. And then you will be good to go to get email updates from the Federal Register. Kyle, I know this is your warehouse. You want to talk about
Well,
anything there?
I would just say this, that you don't have to get the full Federal Register every morning. You can have the subscription to where it's just BLM Nevada, or BLM Utah, BLM California, and you can manage it in a way so you're only getting things that you really want. Like I don't necessarily need everything that the Department of Education is doing or some other obscure agency. If you want that, you can, by all means. This is the way to see every major action that federal agencies are taking. Like, this is how we actually can better understand what the hell it is our government is doing. But yeah, reading the Federal Register every day isn't necessarily a treat, and so it's nice. You can tailor things, and I think with all of this said, like, please feel free to reach out if you are feeling overwhelmed or want a bit of a tutorial to walk through it. But yeah, set up your account at the My FR tab. If you just Google Federal Register tomorrow or whenever, you can sign in or sign up, and then it'll you'll be able to navigate it. So thank you, Allison, for giving me that.
Absolutely. I'll stop screen sharing and let you hop back in.
All right. And I think we're grateful for Patrick and still being here, all things considered, and you all have to deal with my voice for a little bit longer as I go through the slides that Patrick put together. And keep an eye on the chat, and he's obviously providing a lot of good information, supplementing what I'm saying. And I think this is where my original presentation was like, what is it and why does it matter? Why is it this way? This is kind of how do you do it? Some more of the how to. So without further ado, and I will go through this, so then we can get to Q&A as well. All right, process and anatomy of an EIS. And as Patrick notes, this also applies to EAs, which are much squishier and less legally enforceable. Boo. So I think going back to the beginning, that little flow chart that I have, this is really important. When you see that notice of an intent, when an EIS is announced, you're going to see it in the Federal Register. You're going to get that press release and the notice of intent to prepare an EIS. That will then kick off a 30-day scoping period where anything that you may be concerned about or have an interest in, that you just let that be like a stream of consciousness. Any cogent thought that you have, this is your opportunity to put BLM on notice or put the Forest Service on notice or any other agency that they need to be thinking about these things. There could be public meetings that are announced that would come in the notice, not legally required. And a lot of them are on Zoom. In the old days, it was, yeah, let's go to some local office. That's not happening as much anymore with Zoom, and then they become much more scripted and limited, and you have less access to officials, unfortunately. Then after that, after scoping, then you're waiting for a draft EIS. That's when you're checking the Federal Register every day. You're waiting for that press release to land in the inbox that says the draft is out. The draft is available, and then the trigger starts for this public comment period. And I glossed over this a little bit, but NEPA is the heart of giving us, we the people, the say and our ability to have a say in these major federal projects. And the clock can tick anywhere from 30 days to 90 days. And I think that's why folks, public interest minded folks, are always, anxiously waiting for when it lands when that email saying it's released lands in your inbox, because you want to know you want to have the most amount of time to review a 1,000-page document and get comments in, begin working with, if you are inclined, like our groups are, you work with your attorneys and hydrologists and biologists and other experts. And, or if you're just a private citizen, you're taking the time to think about, what it is that you really want to say and what it is that you're worried about. And I think Patrick, as he put here, the kitchen sink approach. You throw everything, any scholarly, literature that you have, scientific journal, anything from anyone that is credible, you throw it in there, and the agency has to consider it. And then after a final EIS comes out, the final EIS is what comes out after the draft. And in theory, it's an agency has considered everything that we've all said. It's, maybe fix some errors, fix some problems. And, if you still have you have a period to comment on that. And then after that, then the record of decision comes out, or the decision record. Or for an EA, again, you can have the decision record or the finding of no significant impact. And that's the final agency say. So that's, as it relates to the analysis, then it's basically all over from that point. And then you can, as Patrick said, protests go to the abyss, the Interior Board of Land Appeals, when I referred to deeper layers of the bureaucracy before. That's IBLA. And they are like a quasi-governmental entity within DOI that would, in theory, give a hard review at the agency discretion. Was anything arbitrary and capricious? But there are some examples, as Patrick, it's later in the presentation, where then you could also begin going to federal district court. This piece right here, really important about tribal consultation. I think sometimes, ironically enough, like NGOs and stuff like that, non-tribal entities might think that consultation is a bit of a stronger legal hook than it has been treated by the courts or by agencies, unfortunately. I think calling it a pro forma exercise is very kind and generous, because it's more, it can often feel like box checking, as Patrick put there. And
Yeah. And many organizations or agencies really will reach out to tribes, not get an answer or response from anyone, and call it consultation because they reached out, rather than meaningfully engaging with them. So, as nonprofits and other organizations like that, it's something for us to be aware of when agencies tell you that, oh yeah, we consulted with them and got no response, or it wasn't of concern. There's some opportunity to be wary there.
that's an excellent point, and I know I've seen it, and in my workings and experiences on EISs, it's despicable. ESA, this is where we truly wish Patrick had his full voice right now, and I think it is very important to understand how what types of reviews are conducted in conjunction with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and an agency like the BLM or the Forest Service or the Bureau of Reclamation, as it relates to how are we considering endangered species. And as you can see here, there are a number of layers to this. And as you can imagine, there are very often the not likely to adversely affect is chosen versus the other. And this does just trigger a whole set of bureaucratic engagements detailed here by these acronyms that lead to ultimate decisions from the agency. And then it's up to us to decide whether or not we think they were arbitrary and capricious. And again, getting a little bit deeper into that as it relates to biological opinions, and if they determine jeopardy, and what this means for listed species, and T&E being threatened and endangered, as Patrick has listed. Again, this all comes back to, as it relates to public interest minded folks, what is the agency discretion here? And this, I think, exemplifies how important it is to be loading the record with everything that we know to be true about the given status of, in this case, of a threatened or endangered species. So I will kind of gloss over some of this just a little bit more, and we saw earlier with that SEIS, with the supplemental, I really didn't even get into that, but in all of these things with EISs, here's purpose and need, the proposed action and alternatives. I think that's really important as it relates to what's being considered. Is it we want a pipeline, and this is whatever proposal, whoever's proposing it, they want the pipeline in this way. It's their preferred or proposed alternative, and then there might be some other alternatives. Maybe it's that pipeline, but with less water, or a shorter route, some other type of route. or maybe a conservation alternative. Instead of having a pipeline to deliver water, it's some other thing to get water to a place. And then there will be these other elements considered. The environmental consequences of the proposed action. It usually involves some modeling, for example, and that's why it's largely incumbent upon public interest groups, members of the public, again, to throw the kitchen sink right back at them if we are concerned about something, or maybe something's great. But if you're concerned, it's important to come to the table with a suite of tools, whether it be hydrologic analysis, biological analysis, any other type of analysis that you think would be necessary in order to push back against what is being put forth. And again, I think this is really important, as we saw in the other slides, the things to just really pay a lot of attention to. I think purpose and need is one where members of the public always, I think, do an excellent job of providing meaningful critiques. And that's when knowing your community and understanding your community, maybe more than a project developer, can really help, we hope, sway an agency's thinking about this. And the same thing goes with alternatives. Something that we're always thinking about is cost to taxpayers, cost to the public. What is the ultimate, economics of what is being put forth? What does it mean? In addition to the biological and ecological and sociological elements put forth, and I don't think those that sociological element of it should be ignored or eschewed either. And again, baseline environmental consequences. This is why we got to throw the kitchen sink and come with the best data that we possibly can. And of course, litigation is a tool in the toolbox if you don't like a decision. I think in this case, Patrick used the example of is the biological opinion sufficient and supported by evidence and science. And I think it is important. While it's difficult to stop and kill a project once it gets moving, the ESA is a tool that has been proven to do that. We've seen the Clean Water Act do it. We've seen the Federal Lands Policy and Management Act do it. As Patrick mentioned, mixed record on tribal consultation, certainly not a silver bullet. And I'm really glad Patrick added these slides right here, because yeah, engaging in Nepa is essential. If nobody comments, they're just the preferred and proposed alternative is going to go through. And that's why it's so important to understand where things are in the process and be engaged from the beginning. But I think, while we're having this discussion about NEPA, it's also important to consider that because NEPA is procedural in nature and not that silver bullet that there might be appearances of, or a mythology of, a zeitgeist of, especially as we deal with it on water projects, the best way to stop a project that might be harmful is to take other types of actions before it even gets to NEPA, because unfortunately there can be the bakery can be full of cakes being baked before the NEPA even begins. And in many cases, companies are paying the BLM to hire consultants to go out and do this work. It's not, we don't have like an army of bureaucrats and technocrats doing this in a wholly objective way. The BLM is partnering with entities that corporations are paying for to do the work. It's scary. And it's, one of the things we don't fund these agencies well enough to do this work sometimes. And so, there are questions, and, I don't like to point fingers and say our government agencies aren't inherently objective, but I've seen enough in my career, in my life, and I know many of you have as well. So, thank you for that, Patrick. I'm gonna stop my screen share, shut up, and take some questions. So, thank